How do you replace Cole Caufield? So the news came out this morning, 10:33 a.m. from Chris Johnston, and the Canadians, I guess, also released it, out for the remainder of the season with a shoulder injury. And on top of that, he was playing with this injury for a while, which doesn't make any sense. Still very productive. 2 goals, 1, 2, 1. Ton of shot volume, getting some hits. Obviously didn't hit the last couple of games, but nonetheless, he's difficult to replace because he's very productive in fantasy. So let's take a look at his player hub to see what he's good at. So as you can see here, Cole Caufield, 63 overall. That's not that great in terms of his ability to cover categories. The reason being, he doesn't hit, he doesn't get blocks, and he doesn't get that many assists either. So what he's doing is he's scoring goals at an elite level, 0.57 goals per game. That's incredible. That's 98th percentile in the entire league. On top of that, 96th percentile in shots. So you're getting a lot of shot volume, a lot of goals. That's a 46 goal pace that you're getting out of Cole Caufield this season. And then on top of that, you get 83rd percentile in power play points. So you get goals, you get shot volume, almost 3.5 shots per game, and then 0.21 on the power play. Now, if we look at Pacioretty, you get basically the same thing. A little bit lower on the rating because he has no assists on the season. He only played 5 games. 99th percentile in goals per game. 95th percentile in shots per game. Almost the same volume, 3.2. And then almost the exact same power play points per game, 0.20. So if you're trying to replace one of these two guys, either Pacioretty or Cole Caufield, you're going to be trying to replace goals, shots, and power play production. Pretty much everything else is something that you can just kind of punt, not worry about. You're not necessarily worried about, kind of covering everything here. You're trying to replace an elite goal scoring shot volume guy. So there's 2 different ways to do this. One way involves trading. So the first way we'll look at is trading, and then we'll look at the waiver wire options. So this graph right here, this will be available to anybody who's a part of the Patreon group. You can find any of these graphs, player hubs, in the link in the description below, the Patreon link in the description below. But what you're looking at here is goals per game and shots per game. So this is all the players that are 80th percentile or above in both goals and shots per game. Green is goals, orange is shots, and it's sorted by goals. So you have McDavid at the top, Pastrnak, Thompson, all the way down. So what you're looking at here, Cole Caufield, he was right in this range in terms of his shot and goal volume, both pretty similar in terms of where they rank in this particular graph. Then you look at Pacioretty. He's pretty similar there as well, a little bit lower on the shot volume. The goal production was slightly higher, albeit in a smaller sample size. So if you wanted to find a trade target, you would look at both of these players and see who's around them. Well, you're probably not going to be able to trade for Kaprizov, but in your league, you may be able to trade for Konechny. He's not completely owned up. His ownership has hovered in the 80% range or whatever for the last couple of weeks. It climbed significantly over the month of December, so now he's in the 80, maybe 90th percent range, but he's a potential trade target. You're not going to get Kaprizov. You're not going to get Draisaitl. Maybe you look at Braden Point. People probably know what they have there. You probably won't get Ovechkin or Hughes or any of these other guys. I was looking at maybe Bo Horvat. The thing about Bo Horvat, he's playing some of the best hockey of his life for Bruce Boudreau, and they're about to get a new coach. So normally a new coach would be something that you'd look at as a potential bump, but because he's been playing some of the best hockey of his life, and if you look at his goal pace, 0.68 goals per game. There's only 4 guys in the league better than that this year. That's incredible. So I don't know if he's going to necessarily take a bump from that. But you want to look at guys who are in this general range and try to, figure out who you can pick up that's going to be tradable. Scheifele might be tradable. Nobody's going to get rid of Timo Meier because of all the things that he does. Look at his shot volume, 4.6 shots per game. Nobody's going to get rid of that. Scheifele at 2.6 isn't going to cover it as well for you, but his goal production is pretty good, and you might be able to at least replace that goal production. It's exactly the same as Cole Caufield. So this is the way to look at it from a trading perspective. Now, you could also look at guys like Jakub Vrana. Obviously, he's struggling right now, playing in the AHL, not being productive there. But you could, if you're really desperate, try to take and a swing at him and hope that he makes it back into the NHL. I wouldn't necessarily do that. So the other way you could potentially replace these guys is on the waiver wire. So there's a couple of guys that I noticed that were on my waiver wire. So let's walk through a couple of them. Jared McCann. Let me just back out of this and I'll show you his stats. So you can see here, we're sorting by goals per game, season average right here. And McCann is the best available player when it comes to goals per game, 0.52. The reason he's not on that graph that I just showed you is his shots, only 2.05 shots per game. So he's not that complete in terms of what he's going to provide you, but he's a kind of guy that can go, a couple games with a goal in each game. He can pop off for a hat trick every now and then. He's been a consistent goal scorer throughout the season, and every now and then he gets a power play goal or a power play point. So he's gonna, and on top of all that, you're getting access to Seattle, which last I checked was #1 in the league in terms of goals for. So that's what you're potentially getting out of McCann. If we go back here, you can see some of these other options. Obviously, Pacioretty's gone. Vrana, we know what is going on with that situation. And then you see guys like Verhaeghe, Olofsson. Marchenko is new on this scene, but the reason he's not on that other graph, 1.82 shots per game, so he's just not getting the volume there. Chris Tierney, I think this is sample size. Yeah, he hasn't really played at all, so I don't think that's a viable option. Daniel Sprong could be. 2.16, not great, but 0.39 goals per game, pretty decent. Robbie Fabry is an interesting one. Let me just hop right back over to the player hub. So last time I did this, when I first introduced this change section right here, Fabry was one of the highest changed players on the list because he had just come off of injury. And he's continued that. He's not as high in terms of his change, but he's still trending in the right direction. And he's now a 66 overall. So if you look at it, 0.38 goals per game, that's 92nd percentile. So that's good. It's pretty close to what you're trying to replace with Cole Caufield, but nonetheless, you're getting something there. The shots aren't good enough, and the power play is not quite good enough yet. But he is getting some hits coverage, so you could potentially factor that in if you're in a bangers league. And then he does get a couple blocks too, so you could also think of that. But the reason I'm mentioning him is because he just came off of an injury, so he's basically not that owned up. And he is doing pretty well in terms of his change interval, and then the fact that he's still a 66 and climbing. So he could potentially hit the low 70s as early as next week if he continues to play like this. And there are other guys like that you could potentially target that are moving up in the rankings. But let's go back to that other graph to see what kind of waiver players were available. So when we were on the previous screen, a couple of those guys we talked about, McCann, not on this list. Carter Verhaeghe is, though. So if I could just find him, because my eyes are a little lost here, but we're at Caufield right here, Verhaeghe right down here. So he's not quite as good in terms of his goal per game or shot per game, but that 2.98 is probably the best you're going to get on the waiver wire, and then you're still getting 0.46 goals per game, which is at least a 30-goal pace. So you're getting something similar to what you were getting out of Cole Caufield, and you're only, he might or might not be there for you on your wire. He's there on my wire. So that is something to take into account. Now, as you slide this down, you see Victor Olofsson. He's got lower shot volume, 2.25, and his goal per game is pretty decent, 0.43. And as I've mentioned a couple times on the channel before, he's a guy who's streaky. So he'll go, 4 or 5 games without a goal, and then he'll pop off for 2 or 3. So he's not as consistent of an option as a guy like Verhaeghe, who has been pretty consistent, not just this year, but also last year. As we saw in that video I did on the Florida Panthers, he was pretty much exactly where he was at last year at the same time this year. So he's been pretty productive throughout the past 2 seasons, and I would trust Verhaeghe a little bit more. There's a couple of other guys that you could potentially target. Jeff Skinner is going to be owned up by now, but if for whatever reason he's there on your wire, if somebody dropped Jake DeBrusk because of his injury, you could potentially look at that as a replacement option. Brandon Hagel, if he's still there on your wire, that's a guy you could potentially look at. I would imagine that he's pretty owned up at this point because of the fact that he's been doing this for quite a while now. But a guy like Daniel Sprong, who we saw in that previous Yahoo page, 0.39 and 2.1, the shots are a little low. So that's what you're getting out of all these waiver guys. So you look at Victor Olofsson, the shots are low. Same thing with Hagel. Same thing with Sprong. But the goal coverage is pretty decent. Now, as you go down this list, it's getting a little bit thinner. But, you could go for Riley Smith. He's a similar type of player who's usually available on 12-team waiver wires, 10-team waiver wires, probably not 14-team league waiver wires, but nonetheless, guys like Smith, guys like Kempe, you're getting something close to what you're trying to replace, but you're not going to get, the same level. So just to sum up what we've talked about today, you have Caufield, you have Pacioretty on your roster, and you need to replace them. So the two options you have are to trade. Your top trade targets would be guys like Bo Horvat, maybe Braden Point. Travis Konechny would be an obvious trade option because of the lack of name value. Mark Scheifele could be an option. William Nylander, Alex Tuck. Those would be some options I would look at in terms of trade targets. If we're trying to replace one of these two players on the waiver wire, it seems to me the best option is Verhaeghe, who's right here. He's the closest in terms of his shot volume. All the other waiver options are going to have lower shot volume than a guy like Verhaeghe. In the high, the low twos is what you're going to get. The high 1.8 to 2.4 range is what you're looking at in terms of waiver guys. And Verhaeghe's going to be better than that. So he's 0.46 goals per game and 2.98, almost 3 shots per game. So these are just a couple of options. Again, if you want this particular chart, or if you want any of the player hubs that we saw today, you can find those in the Patreon link in the description below. Just wanted to do a quick video for all of you guys out there like myself who were panicking this morning after seeing that news about Cole Caufield. I'd been holding on to Pacioretty since the draft, hoping that I'd get him for the second half, and I should have traded him when he came back, but I was very excited about what he could provide for an elite offensive team like the Canes. And now you get the news about Cole Caufield, and that's also devastating for certain league formats. For other league formats, if you're, not worried about goals and shots or whatever, and, these guys are not necessarily, Cole Caufield wasn't the most complete player as we saw on the player hub, so they might be replaceable in other areas. You could find a better overall option for your category league that covers something different. But either way, hopefully this provided you with some options for your waiver pickups or trade targets. And hopefully you can navigate this injury situation better than I can, because it's definitely a struggle right now. But thanks for watching again. We're going to have the weekly video, hopefully either out tonight or tomorrow, and I will see you in that video.